Now, listen, we have got a special guest here, also an author. So I wanted to invite Harry Carr to join us. Harry, I'm going to pin you to the stage. There you go. And if you unmute yourself, there we go. Welcome, Harry.
Hello.
Harry is not Matt Rudd. Harry is Harry Carr. And Harry Carr is a policy researcher, a pollster, and a data journalist, and worked with many different media organizations and all sorts of things, and has a book coming out this autumn, I believe, Harry, called What a Man Is Not, which is an intriguing and provocative title, which sounds right up our street. Now, we're a little ahead of your book launch, but you overlap significantly with this theme. And interestingly, unlike Matt's book, quite driven by data and what does the science and the statistics say behind the stories that we're hearing so much about in the Manosphere. So I'm going to ask you a few questions on that. Rebel Book Clubbers, do your Google research on Harry whilst we're having a chat, or if you've got questions that have come up because of your reading, get ready to ask Harry. And then we will have about 20 minutes chatting with Harry, and then we'll have some breakouts where we can deep dive into this topic and our perspectives. So just to kick off, Harry, thank you for saying yes to this. It's great to have you with us. So Matt Rudd's book, if we start with that, maybe linking from the two books that have been most read this month, so Matt's and then James Bloodworth's book. He talks about middle-aged men, middle-class professionals being unhappy but not being able to admit it. In the research that you've been doing, and you can tell us a bit about that, is Matt's premise backed up by what you've been learning about?
So I guess the problem statement of the whole book, of my book, but which I think chimes exactly with his and I think there's a lot of overlap with James's as well, is that boys and men have dreadful outcomes across a wide variety of measures, and whilst men are much less likely to come forward and talk about those things, they're also vastly more likely to end up dying by suicide or from death to despair relating to drugs, more likely to end up homeless, more likely to have fewer and less close friends. So all of those things are massive, are definitely massive problems, and there's reams of data that's underlying all of that. And yeah, my book, I guess, takes that as a jumping off point. It provides a lot of that evidence, but it then kind of goes on to what Matt explicitly talks about not doing, which is to try and say, okay, so what's the solution? What can we actually try to go and achieve and find a way to actually break this down? We've been talking about this for decades, and not actually, I think, taking seriously what feels like some obvious solutions to it, and where there's kind of very clear evidence about what some of those solutions might be.
That's great. That's a great intro. And just before you come on to the solutions, because that's what we're all interested in and sharing. So the evidence that you sketched out there, that what your book dives into, is that across all demographics of men, and is it focused here in the UK? Is it across different economic backgrounds? What reach is that data covering?
So if we're talking about things like male suicide, then that is true across the age spectrum and across classes as well. So you see that from young men especially. There are actually new and sort of worrying attitudinal and behavioural trends which are specific to younger men. So 1 in 20 young men now have eating disorders, which in 2017 was statistically 0%. There's new changes which are happening there, which is clearly something which is very specific to those younger men. But no, older men are also vastly more likely to kill themselves than their female counterparts. Across the spectrum, men are more likely to eat less well, to abuse drugs and alcohol, to be reckless. Boys are about 6 times more likely to drown than women. We've got this gigantic range of negative behaviours, which across all spectrums, and this is true across societies, the wealthier you are and the wealthier your upbringing is, the more likely you are the less likely you are to have some of these toxic behaviours. But at every given point along that spectrum, boys do less well in all of those, more or less all of those areas, than girls. That's generally true basically across the wealthy world. It's much harder to get the data for the developing world, but certainly on suicide rates, I know off the top of my head that I think everywhere apart from Afghanistan, maybe that men are more likely to die by suicide. So there are obviously vast parts of life where women are considerably worse off too. This is not to say that men are worse off in every single given way, and it's definitely not the case that this is a zero-sum game. That we need to that focusing on men means that we need to focus less on women. But yes, there are demographic shifts across it, but my general focus has been on what's true across the spectrum, which is that this kind of wide variety of things where there's a clear problem at every given point for men in particular, and because they are men, and because of what we tell boys about what it is to be a man, which is where we need to make a change.
And thank you for sketching that out, Harry. And what is it that's, you say this goes back decades? You're surprised that we haven't started putting the solutions on, which we'll come to talk about sooner. But why has that shift generally, from your research, have we seen it happen across society? What's caused this rise in men being less happy?
I don't know if there's a rise. I think we've always been less happy in general. I think there's what the big difference, I think, has been is a gigantic shift in female outcomes, which has absolutely not been matched by men. So there's a really interesting graphic. I'll see if I can find it and put it on here. It didn't get into my book because it's too colourful. We couldn't get it, shouldn't show it. But it shows the mortality ratio for people from age 15 to 40 by gender. And it goes back to 1850 and covers all the way across to 2000. And actually, like you look at the statistics going from 2000 to 2026, it looks very similar. It's by they're called Jeanette Rigby and Danny Dorling, who I think were at the University of Sheffield at the time they wrote it. Danny's now at Oxford. And what it showed was this color chart, and there's this sort of dash of pink where it goes above the ratio of 3 to 1 of male deaths to female deaths. You go back to 1850 through to about 1970, and there are two tiny blips where that actually happens. And it gets to 3 to 1, more than 3 to 1 men aged 15 to 40 dying than women. And they were the two world wars. It's very specifically in those gaps. And then from 1970 onwards, it is just pink. The whole chart turns to this to a greater to 3 to 1 or higher across the age spectrums from the late teens through to the late 30s, and that is entirely counterintuitively because of good things happening, in that it is women getting vastly longer lives, being vastly less likely to have mortality, and boys and men not getting better. It's not that boys and men have got worse, or there's been a rise in the negative outcomes for boys and men. It's that women have done fantastically well over the last 50 years, and men just haven't changed in the same way at all.
And is that evidence really around biology, and is it connected to biology and health versus culture? I mean, as the reading we've been doing, this seems to be across all sorts of different impacts, with the exceptions of things like the world wars. But how much is it related? Is there a strong biology argument in this, or is it a lot of the assumption or the evidence come back to culture?
So there's no one answer to it, but it's going to be largely behaviour. Right? That's the key thing, which can be the only answer here. And like the reason why I mentioned the last 50 years is because I think that is where there's been this big shift, and I think it's where the answer is here, right? Not wanting to go too far into that, if you want to keep your powder dry slightly on it. But there's been a fundamental shift in the way that women think about themselves and are thought about over the last 50 years, which has been gigantically freeing and emancipatory. And I don't think that we've matched that for boys and men. I say more likely the reason why you're dying between your late teens and your late 30s is largely not going to be because of biological factors. It is largely going to be because you're more likely to be doing stupid things, not looking after your body properly, taking much larger risks, and being in more stressful situations where you're more deeply unhappy, and you're being much more likely to, for example, kill yourselves. So and to get into fights and to do all the stuff that we know that men are more likely to do. Part of that is going to be biological, not all of it, and I think that vastly more of it than a behavioural an evolutionary psychologist might have as their prior. And I think the evidence for that is how anyone who had made any kind of assumptions on the basis of the same kind of basis about what women were capable of would have been proven wrong and wrong and wrong again over the last 50 years. I think we can't say it's one big thing and that there's this one lever that will suddenly make mortality rates become equal. I just don't think there is. But I do think that that is an important part of the story, and that is the first step on the solution.
Is, as you describe that, it makes me think of the endless memes that go on around, why women live longer than men, and there's a clip of men throwing themselves off cliffs or bridges or giant rope swings and so on. So yeah, it's almost comical, isn't it? The sort of Darwin Awards are dominated by men. But coming back to bringing it back to this word, the manosphere, which has only really come out in the last few years, and has sort of exploded now. Where does this fit in for you? Because you've obviously been studying this for a while. What does this new framing of the manosphere mean to you, and how does your data relate to it and what you've been writing about?
So I think it's a symptom and it's a cause. It's not something that has come out of nowhere. There's always been that kind of strain of thought. It's not entirely novel, and a big part of the problem here is absolute social media, and that being a completely new thing, which is both allowing people to access this stuff, which was always there, but there were important gatekeepers to our social norms, which were able to keep it down, frankly, in a way that social media, especially now in the last few years, where gatekeeping has gone from quite bad to completely non-existent on certain platforms. But it's also, I think there's part of the problem here is men have these dreadful outcomes, and we're quite comfortable talking about some of them and much more familiar with some of them. There is a second, the problem is, I think the problem is not confined to those the issues which are basically entirely caused by the men themselves, and where the fix is to just change their behaviors. There's this kind of wider societal problem there, and that is true not only in perpetuating, I think, the assumptions about what it is to be a man that those boys are internalizing, but I think boys are also men are not just holding themselves back. There are important ways in which they're being held back, and I think the manosphere and whatever previous versions of that have held a monopoly on validating where there are some actual legitimate grievances there, and leaving them no space to go out and be. They've found themselves embattled in a place where they feel their voice is not heard, their problems are ignored or not taken seriously or even mocked. Who feel like they're treated as bogeymen rather than as real people with real problems, which require real solutions. So, I remember I lived through #KillAllMen and #MenAreTrash, and today heterofatalism and so on are kind of equivalent things, which are condoned by people that you would expect to know better, and who I know have values which are at odds with them across every other part of their politics and lives. Which there just seems to be a blind spot there, which I think is driving boys away actively. And
but why does that blind spot exist, do you think?
So I think it goes back to the ways that we traditionally see boys and men, and we just haven't ever tried to challenge those. To give an example of the kind of biases that I was talking about, so education is a clear one here, where if you obviously boys have worse educational outcomes. And if you look at university admissions in particular, they're based on predicted grades. So the grades that teachers predict for their students. And if you look at that by gender, and you get millions of data points here. There's compelling evidence, and this is actually true across lots of countries, not just the UK. Boys are consistently underestimated in the grades that they are predicted if you compare them with girls. And that's true across every the main subject that universities ask for. And it's true at every achievement level, whether you're aiming for an A star or for a C or below. And that's really important. It's obviously really important for boys and young men in particular. But it's important not only for what that means in itself, although that matters a great deal in itself, and boys are far less likely to go on to higher education, but it also matters in what it indicates about what boys have experienced throughout their teaching career, their school career, before they get to that point. And I didn't know that before I wrote this book. And I come from a family of teachers and care enough about this stuff to have written a book about it. And I don't think those issues are taken seriously at all. So why is it not taken seriously? Which was sort of just to come back to your question. I think it goes back to, we have this view of what it is to be a man, which is at odds with being a victim, at odds with being weaker and admitting that you have that you have an issue, which I think goes back to, thousands of years, where through most of history, if your men were comfortable talking about all of their worries and were not willing to be fairly nonchalant about their lives, then you stood to be eviscerated by the guys next door whose men were willing to go out.
You weren't rewarded for that behavior.
You were not rewarded. Well, cultures, societies were not rewarded for that behavior, and as a result of it, we have great big stigmas about being a victim, about being weak, about being small, about being pacifist coded, I guess, being everything that Andrew Tate hates, right? Was something which was stigmatized and still is to a large degree, and we've never properly seriously fought that instinct. And I think so, to come towards the kind of what the solution here, what I think is the way out of this, and what I think is an obvious one, is that I think there's a clear and proven answer which is right there on the shelf, and we've never tried it, and which is, if you want to change the way a gender is thought about and thinks about itself, there's a movement that's done it. It's called feminism. The feminism is not the enemy of boys who are worried about this stuff and feel a sense of injustice and want to take it seriously. It's the solution. There's a natural alliance there between feminists and between boys and men who are worried about these kind of issues, but neither side yet seem to realize it. And I think the key tool, and this is why What a Man Is Not is the title. The key tool is clarity about what a woman is not. So there's never been any unity in feminism or anywhere about what femininity is, what women should be. But where the power has been, and where feminism's gigantic success has been, is in clarity about what women are not, and really resolutely defended red lines against any toe over the line on that. So women are not any of the stereotypical negative associations which have been there throughout history. Women are not submissive or sentimental or weak or hysterical. And if any individual woman holds those traits, that's not because she's a woman. And even the sort of positive associations that were historically there with women are not how a woman is to be judged. A woman is not to be judged on her maternity or her sexuality or her nurturing tendencies. And again, any given woman might consider that part of her own femininity and might be something that she wants to be valued by, but that does not tell you anything about any other woman. And the reason why that's important is really well evidenced and really clear. The associations we pull together, we hold in our brains with any given demographic are really hard to get rid of once we've started thinking in that way. Yeah. And even subtle discrimination ends up with really dreadful outcomes for the people who are subject to it. They are less, they're consistently less motivated at school and do less well at school, less motivated at work and do less well at work, more likely to have poor mental health, are more likely to abuse alcohol and drugs, and are more likely to have cardiovascular issues. But we haven't extended those defenses to boys and men. It is still quite commonplace to perpetuate negative associations, even amongst people that I generally agree with on the kind of fuzzy centre left. There are not those protections in place. We very frequently say negative things about men as kind of crass generalizations, and there are no social consequences to them in ways that, you know, on an individual basis feel like they're quite silly and something that it's a bit thin-skinned to make a point of, but which accrue, and you end up having to lift a ton of feathers. That's the argument that I make.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's so fascinating how you sketch that out, and you're very articulate in the way of describing this, because it's such a reactive. As even if we've seen in our kind and curious community here, Rebel Book Club online this month, it's very hard to read and statements or perspectives on things, and sometimes not to come from a point of view of like, that's not an attack, but that triggers all sorts of stuff for all of us. So you clearly navigate this world very well. Got one more question from me, and then I'd love to invite members in for a few minutes to chat with Harry. And you can just come off when I invite you, come off your mic and join us here. So this solution, so what a man is not, is the potential new solution, of which it's the title of your book, and here's the manifesto for redefining man, or what men are not. What's the part we can play in the beginning of that, as well as buying your book when it comes out in November? What the sort of, next time we're in the pub with friends, or talking, if we're women talking to men in our lives or in work, how do we start to make that shift happen?
So I think the change, and I think this is why it feels obvious to me, and why I've struggled with the fact that no one has come here first, right? Is that it's as simple as applying exactly the way that we think about women to men, because it's essentially the same problem. We need to change the way that men are thought about, and we're coming from a very different starting place. But what we needed to do 50 years ago and more, obviously, was to change the way that we thought about women. And the key was to just basically give them the freedom from the set. I think there's two voices that men hold in their heads, and I think that I think that was probably more true for women 50 years ago than it was for now. There may be women on this call who can tell me, who were there 50 years ago and now, and can tell me how true this is. I think boys hold two things in their head at the same time now. One, which is their kind of standard values, everything they were brought up with, and what they think are kind of universal values of how people should be, and their ethics, how people should treat each other. And then there's a second voice, which is, how do you be a good man? Which quite often is the way where you go from people who know damn well that being aggressive and being violent and being abusive towards women, pressing women for sex, whatever it is wrong. But they also hold at the same time this view of, well, if I'm going to be a man, I need to be having regular sex. I need to be the dominant person in the room. I need to be assertive and show myself to be those things. And we just need to get rid of that second voice. And the way that we do that is by taking away any kind of anything which is perpetuating the idea that is the case. And I think that even kind of so this is where I'm going to lose some of you, and it's going to get more controversial, but I think that includes Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate and large parts of the Daily Mail's opinion section, right? But I think it also includes mansplaining, includes manspreading and mancorrupting, includes Angela Rayner calling Rishi Sunak a pint-sized loser in PMQs, includes AOC saying exactly the same thing, basically about Stephen Miller. It means people saying, F off, you grotty little virgin, to incels. Because not that they don't deserve it, but if you are saying that being a virgin is a bad thing, you're saying that men are to be valued by their sexual prolificacy, which is exactly what you don't want to say. But I hear that very frequently from people who otherwise would be absolutely distance themselves from any of those kind of views. Who would never say that men should be big, strong providers, but are okay with saying, "Go, f off, you short virgin," to someone. And that's I think where we need to make that kind of behaviour change, which is an actual change that people really need to make.
And there's a reality in every school playground, right? When the role models are being looked for and so on. I mean, I ran a training day on entrepreneurship with 70 boys last week, and it was interesting looking at the brand. We were looking at role models, but the brands that they look up to in the world, and it was all sport and technology, which arguably define that stereotype that we're trying to shift. Okay, I want to sit in the pub with Harry all night and chat with all this sort of stuff. But let's bring in a couple of our wise voices now. So Eamon's making the point. Looks like 75% female. We're about 65% female across Rebel Book Club, so it's not too far away. But you think this might swing it the other way a little bit, but there we go. Who would like to? Questions for Harry? Come and join us, or drop it into the chat if you're not comfortable coming on camera and muting yourself. Just for a few minutes before we go into a breakout room, and you can declare how you really feel about everything with 2 or 3 of your friends at Rebel Book Club. Who would like to come and ask a question? I know you're listening away. Does this make sense? Yes, Ginny, come and unmute yourself so we can hear you.
That was so interesting, and I find what you said about Afghanistan super interesting as well. And I wonder what is it because they're not hearing the crass generalizations then, and they're not? I don't know. It just seems intriguing, that culture as somewhere where they're not experiencing the same things and pinpointing what it is.
I expect that's more women being more likely to commit suicide than men being less. Would be my bleak answer to
because
to
the
that
suppression in Afghanistan is worse than most places for women.
Well, exactly, it is a very bad place to be. My knowledge of the data is very much stronger in the Western world, and particularly in the UK, in the UK and in the US, where I spend where my day job is. But what is interesting is that that women have, on average, are more likely to say that they have a higher lifespan. Even in some of those, even in countries, I don't know about Afghanistan in particular, but across developing countries where you would think that, given that there is gigantic gender inequality in some of them, that it would not be that way around. Which is, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of kind of interesting back and forth on what that looks like. Someone has looked at how they kind of score things comparatively, and women are just more likely to give higher responses overall. But I think that there is part of the answer, I suspect, is that family time, and this is something which actually I haven't got around to talking about today, and I'm very passionate about and write about a lot, is something that's really important, and something which we underestimate as an inequality. Even where men are, where women are oppressed in all sorts of terrible ways, family is just very, very important to the way that everyone functions, and the fact that men have been kept away from their children, frankly, by the expectations that they spend more time in work, and that is not their role. That even having kind of an emotional relationship with your children is something somehow unmanly. It's something that really holds, not just in the economically rich world, but also in the developing world, really holds men back and men down.
And then that gets passed on to the next generation. Ginny,
Exactly.
What's your perspective on this generally on this theme? Is it shifting since you've sort of, anything coming up as you've dived into it or listening to Harry tonight?
It's a hard one, isn't it? It's because I think before I hadn't really gotten into the whole thing, but then reading this book and listening to you, because it does feel like the society has been made by men, for men. Like, it's everything sort of, but then I've been having conversations recently with my partner, for example, and understanding it's sort of suddenly resonating. Actually, there is quite deep unhappiness. Everyone's just got caught in the way you're supposed to do things, and it's really exciting that these books are coming out and the conversations happening, because it would be so amazing to see a shift and allow men to have a relief and a release and be themselves. And I think that point about family is so interesting, because it's almost like when people become grandfathers, they suddenly are allowed to then express maybe everything they would have liked to have expressed earlier on as a father, maybe. So that's really interesting. So it's an exciting time, and I hope that we can all help each other and make the shift.
Thanks, Ginny. You've also just reminded me of the book that we read that had a huge impact on this community a few years ago, called Invisible Women, which was about how a world built by men causes pain and suffering for women, from smaller things like the size of a smartphone, right, in the palm of a woman's hand is not designed for a woman, all the way through to sanitation systems across rural India being corrupted and deprioritized because men are in charge, and that makes the life and suffering of women much worse as a result. So I think because of that, it's hard. It sometimes feels hard, doesn't it, to hold these two truths at once, but we live in this very complex new world, and this is clearly a challenge as well. I'm going to come back to, I'm going to bring Ema in. Thanks, Ginny. Where is Ema? Let's bring you. I think I saw you raise your hand. Ema, come and join us if we can hear you. Yes, here you are. You're on mute. I can see you expressing the question, but we can't hear you. There's a little mic at the bottom there. Yeah, that's the one.
You didn't hear my words of wisdom.
They're here. I know they're here because I know you.
No.
What's on your mind?
So what I said was I read both the books, and I thought they were both very interesting, and I'm horrified that Harry's book wasn't available to us. So hopefully,
it's available for pre-order now. Please, yeah.
Okay, pre-orders. So, but having read it, it's really interesting, because I was kind of going, yeah, this is all very valid, and the poor men. But it's only hearing Harry speak that I'm realizing, as a woman, that I've got a part to play in it, with the, when you talk about mansplaining, saying, oh, bloody men again, or, bloody male driver. And actually, that's part of it. So I need to realize that I'm part of the problem too. And I think it's really interesting that you're saying part of the issue is that women have achieved so much and moved on, which I absolutely believe. Like, I know when my mother got married, she wasn't allowed to have her own bank account. She wasn't allowed move. When my mother-in-law died recently, and we were trying to sort her affairs out, and we asked my father-in-law what her national insurance number was, and he reeled it off, and we were like, how do you know what her national insurance number was? It was because when she got married, her national insurance number became his, with a W at the end, for wife. This is in Ireland. Wow. So yeah, so all that kind of stuff. So it's a completely different world. And I've worked in a very male oriented all my life. I've been in investment banking and in energy. So I'm surrounded by men. I'm often the only woman in the room. And it's never bothered me, but I'm really intrigued, Harry, and thank you for that, for making me realize as a female that actually I have a role to play in changing this too.
Oh, fantastic. That's really touching and wonderful. It's exactly the reaction I was hoping for, and I haven't always got. So I really appreciate that.
It's interesting. So something that Matt said on the end of his video we didn't hear earlier, Matt Rudd, who author of Man Down, is that the evidence that he's got so far is that more women than men have read his book. And I don't know if that's good news or not.
Men just don't read. Maybe this is
yeah, maybe that's part of it. No, but look at this community. I think, Ema, you brought it, or someone brought it up earlier. The 75% here. Is it because football's on? I think, Rebel Book Club is quite I don't know. It was started by two, male professionals, myself and Ben, from a certain lived experience of the world, right? And yet the majority of it is now women from a wonderfully diverse range of backgrounds. And I just think that actually when we dig into our little data in our community, it's often this sort of thing that we get the emails and the notes, right? And we have men who join it, and then I'd love to hear from some here. And then they'll say, we've had it a couple of times this year, said they've left because it's too feminist. And yeah, it's not frequent, but it's like, oh, we only read books by women about women. And obviously the evidence of our library and our community is that that's just not true. It's very far from the truth. We've made an effort to balance our perspectives and books and all sorts of stuff. This month we've had people saying we shouldn't be reading all books by men, but which is also an interesting point, right, on this topic. But it's Rebel Book Club. You read whatever you want as long as you explore the topic. That's our mantra. So we're a little case study, but I wonder if it feels like, Harry, we're in this sort of, and Emma, you're here as well with your wisdom. We're in these confusing times around gender identity and so on. And coming back, Harry, to the solution, what can we do in our worlds right now, whatever we're doing to start to help be useful?
Yeah, so I guess it's reiterating it, but so we can, so some important things, I think. So one is, if you are a teacher, if you know some children, if you know some boys, especially teenage boys, and when they're more able to kind of understand these kind of things and to communicate them, it's arming them with this, right? So I think that very often girls and boys are separated out aged, in their early teens. And girls are told there are people out there who want to shove you into a box and you tell them to F off, essentially. And boys are told, don't do this, don't do that. And they are two very different psychological approaches. And one of them is much more than the other in changing the way that changing behavior. If you are making an alliance with the boys against external forces, and that includes Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and Nick Fuentes, whoever the misogynist du jour is on the internet. And it also includes calling out your teacher if she's using things like mansplaining and manspreading, or she says, "Oh, typical male behavior," when you're picking your nose at the back of the class. You can give them both of those weapons, which A, protects you against Andrew Tate, and B, gives them a voice, and also will help teachers to understand that actually they need to shift the way that they are thinking when they're teaching their children, when they're teaching the boys, when they're setting expectations for boys. If they know that actually on average they are likely to be underestimating them, then maybe that's something that will create change. The same is actually true for hiring managers in traditional female roles. Men are consistently discriminated against and have been consistently for decades in a way that women were in the 1970s and still are in some cases, but it's massively declined over time. In the kind of send two CVs out, they're identical apart from the names. It's been a massive change over time for women. There's still something there which needs to be addressed, but there has been a big shift. For men, there's just been no shift. There's been no decrease in the amount of discrimination there, and it's telling that again. It's not about men getting worse. It's about things for men not getting better that we need to shift, and it's just spreading that message that we need to take these things seriously. It's the important one.
Great, Emma, quickly, and then I will come.
Sure, and I don't know that I completely agree with that, Harry, but let's not. I'll accept what you say. I have boy-girl twins, so it's been really interesting watching them grow. And from the age of a year, they were just so different. And even though they were thrown into a playpen with the same amount of toys, he was going for balls and she was going for kind of teddies. And I would like to think that they were being nurtured the same. So it's just really interesting. I also happen to be married to somebody who admitted about 5 or 6 years ago, it always got very sad at the end of holidays and eventually said, I think I need help, which really took me by surprise. And he went for therapy, was fortunate enough to work for a company that had an EAP program, started to see a therapist, and within about 3 weeks completely changed his attitude and was a different person and was much more like the person I'd married 20 years previously. So I'm absolutely in favor of people going and talking some of these things out. And some of it was just about very midlife, what have I got? I've achieved nothing. What's it all about? And can't wait to retire, and was made to face, well, what would you do when you retire, and why aren't you doing that now? And it's like, oh well, I actually am doing it now, so maybe it's all right again. But fully just endeavor and encourage anybody, and he's the first person to meet any man or woman and say, take therapy and talk to somebody about it.
All right, Emma, those personal anecdotes are really great. Thanks for sharing. The twins are always a great experiment, aren't they? I remember Roman Kachanik, who's married to Kate Rayworth, two great authors. They're a power couple in the non-fiction world. And we were speaking to him about a book he wrote called Empathy, and they've got twins. And he said the difference between the daughter, the boy and the girl, was that she learned, they both started to sympathize with each other, age whatever it was, 1 or 2. One was crying and the other one was like, passed his teddy, here, use my teddy, Phil, whereas she passed his teddy to him, so she was able to empathize before he was, and that was the sort of the biological comparison they had, and therefore the sort of development from there. Harry, one quick question before we go into breakout rooms. I heard, this is anecdotal, picked up from the book and in real life, teenage boys saying, but Jordan Peterson or whoever the Manosphere role model is, makes me feel good, makes me feel powerful, makes me feel strong. And the equivalent role models on the other side, however good they are at making young men aspire to certain things, it's not the same, it's not as potentially as strong as that emotion. Is that what we're really up against, or do you think there's evidence that aspiration can bring out a strong enough emotion in a different direction?
I think what they're reacting to is seeing someone who is just very explicitly on their side, and I think that's what I'm trying to bring is a pro-feminist alternative for those boys who feel like their legitimate grievances are not being validated. So going out of your way to say this is why the kind of take your teachers to task if they are saying stuff which is trying to put you into a box, and it's stuff which generally, as we know, society will generally be okay with, and I'm sure there are people on this call who use it, and the important part on that is there's a kind of lowering the stakes needed here as well, that I think we've got the culture wrong, but that people have been told that this is punching up, that it is fine, that it's acceptable, that the wider power dynamics mean that it's okay for us to say that sort of stuff, to use those kind of associations as a thing to empower women. Empowering women, fantastic. Doing so by making negative associations with men, I think, is a problem, and I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think empowering boys to be able to say that and to change the way that they're thinking about their masculinity in a way which gives them a proactive thing which is for them, and not just don't do this, don't do that. It would, you're going to be a nice guy if you do that, and there are other people who are smoking cigars and driving past cars who are telling them that being a bad guy is good, and actually that's fine. And all these people who are trying to tell you to buff off the edges are people who wish that they could be me. So I think it's being on their side, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't think there's many people who are explicitly trying to do that.
In this way. Harry, it's great to discover the mission behind the data of your work, and it's a compelling sales pitch for your book, What a Man Is Not. So it's going to play an important part in this conversation. So we're really grateful for your time and sharing this with us. Thank you, Harry.